Thank you. Keston Perry, I'm a student at the School of Oriental and African Studies. I thank you very much for the presentation. I think the very first insight is one that is very useful, that innovation is happening everywhere. However, I think I have a number of issues, both methodologically and conceptually, which I think might need to be considered. There was a lot of work happening at SPRU in the 90s, Martin Bell and others. There's work from Erica Kuma, there's work from Gillian Marcel and so on that conceptualize innovation beyond the Oslo manual, around not very science-oriented, but around technological capability building. I think it was mentioned, learning was mentioned, but I think perhaps we might want to expand our conceptualization. Because if we conceive of things in a particular way, we're going to only find those things. And that becomes problematic. With respect to resource constraints, I was wondering whether it is really a resource constraint or whether the resources that are available to firms, especially women entrepreneurs, are used in a particular kind of way, in the sense of how does indigenous knowledge complement existing resources in firms? I didn't think any indigenous knowledge wasn't touched upon. There was the issue of higher education institutions and whether private sector and so on, private sector works with these institutions. You mentioned in the report 74% of them work through informal interactions, but there was not opening up of that black box about how informal interactions impact on the innovation process, and how it's actually useful in many ways, because I've found in my own research that matters a lot more than the highly formalized knowledge generation that we want to perceive as innovative. So, all right, so I'm going to leave it there.
Okay, Rafi.
Rafi Kaplinski, Spruce, Sussex. Shannon, you won't be able to answer in detail my questions because I'm sure you have a lot of detail to say, but how important is the sector? You started off by saying you had 5 sectors in Ghana, and yet none of your analysis showed us any significant sectoral differences. Is that unimportant? And secondly, the question of causality in your regressions. When a study was done some years ago in Britain on the impact of exporting on learning, they found that the causality was the opposite way round. It wasn't that firms learned through exporting, but it was firms who were learning were firms who were able to compete in external markets. So in general, how have you handled that causality problem in your regressions?
Okay, very good. And the gentleman on the right.
Shall I?
I think it is on. It should be on, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Bruce McKern from Stanford and currently visiting Charlan Centre at Oxford. I want to ask you just 2 questions, Charlan. The first was about incremental versus radical innovation. In our work on China and in your own work on China, I think we've seen that there's not a great deal of what you would call radical, new-to-the-world innovation. I would just like to ask you perhaps if you found that to be the case in Ghana, which I expect would be the case, because firms have to learn to innovate, and they have to learn and have the right market conditions for radical innovation. So that's the first question. And the second one has to do with the point that was just made about exports and firms that are involved in global value chains. I think you said that only 2% of the Ghanaian firms were actually participating in global value chains. What we found in China was that participation in those chains was very important in terms of the pressure created to reduce cost and enhance quality and to reach global standards. So in your cases that you looked at where firms were in regional or local value chains, can you comment as to whether there was a lower quality of innovation happening there? Thanks.
Okay, and Nick.
Nick Russo from BIS. Very interesting talk. Thank you very much. Really useful. I guess the question I was interested in exploring was the extent to which the HE institutions that were not connected with the firms, were they doing research or were they developing material which had relevance to the firms? Or were they kind of in a world that's isolated, you know, doing research which may be excellent in its own terms, but was largely completely kind of separate? I just don't know. You know, I imagine maybe in something like, you know, on a sectoral basis, agricultural research may have relevance to the firms, but again, is what would they have to offer? I guess is the question.
Yeah.
We kind of assume, you know, in the UK we've put a lot of effort into trying to bring the university sector to the point where it has relevance to the commercial sector. That's clearly a factor as well.
All right, okay. One final point, and then we need to move to Professor Lundvall.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Why did you go first then?
Oh, there's not.
Yeah, 2 points then.
Bérangère from Adam Smith International. So just one quick remark and quick question. So through your findings, I actually feel like basically one of the main findings is that the innovation works similarly in low-income countries than in higher-income countries, as in the systemic approach is relevant in both cases. Just the starting point is different, so the challenges are different. So I think it's an interesting finding, if I understood well. And just a quick question also to go back on the importance of knowledge that is external to the firm versus internal innovation or R&D. We know that absorptive capacity is important to benefit from external knowledge. So is your finding saying that knowledge within the firm is not so important when we know that we basically learn by doing? So in order for the firm to benefit from external knowledge, it also needs to create its own knowledge.
Okay, Professor Lundvall. That's the last point. Yep.
Yeah, I want to address something you did not talk about. I mean, has there, and it's a question also to George, I mean, have there been any major initiatives in Ghana in terms of innovation promotion in specific sectors or something like that? And have you considered looking into the efficiency and the relative impact, etc., of these kind of things?
All right, Xiaolong, so over to you. You probably won't be able to answer all of those questions in detail as Rafi was mentioning, but maybe some pointers before we...
Okay, yeah. So I will try to answer as much as I can. First, about the concept of innovation. Actually, we fully recognize and agree that innovation in low-income countries will take a different form, you know, as those taking place in the industrialized, advanced countries. So that is why we have brought in, you know, we are not focusing on patent or R&D investment in as our indicator of innovation. However, we are looking at the outcome, whether you are doing something, as we learned from the case study interview. Are you doing something new, you know, a new product or a new way of process, or a new way of organizing your production, managing, or new ways of marketing? So we rephrased it. However, we also want to keep a benchmark. I think if always argue low-income countries is different, you see, you lose the benchmark. I think there is also an issue about catching up. So that is why we have kept, you know, some relevant elements of the Oslo menu in our research, in our definition of innovation. So that's how we try to, you know, combine them together. What we learned from literature, and also what is what we learned from the field, and bring them together to form our definition, you know, our method to use in our research about what is innovation. Second, I think you raised a very important question, very good, about indigenous knowledge. How much of those indigenous knowledge are used? I think this comes up kind of implicitly in our case study, and from, you know, the way of new marketing. you see, this has to, you need to know the context, to know the market, so that you can successfully bring in new ways of marketing. And also, there are cultural issues in management. Those indigenous knowledge help the managers to recognize what way of new management practice can work in Ghana and what do not work. So I think those indigenous knowledge really has come up, is behind, is implicit. Maybe next step, maybe we can have something, put it more explicit as the center of the research focus. In our next step research, how much indigenous knowledge is used. So it's a very good question. Thank you. And the third one about informal interaction, social network. Yes, we agree. And in our research, we have questions about informal interaction through social networks. How important the knowledge diffused? What we found out is this informal knowledge very much helpful in formation of this network, formation of the collaboration, even formation of a Ghanaian firm collaborate with a US university. Actually, they have relatives which help to build up. So informal interaction, and also in the industrial association in Ghana, that's a big thing. A big channel for knowledge diffusion in the industry, the industrial association. Those events, informal interactions, also are found to be useful. And then, how important are the sectors? Actually, I have the same question, and my assumption originally is there should be significant sectoral effects. However, our statistical study so far, I can't say it's final. That's why I haven't highlighted it. If we divide the sectors according to Pebbles classification about resource-based, scale-based, knowledge-based, and it's not significant. I'm not comfortable about that round of estimation, and I asked this question. Also, Malmo, we discussed this question too. So I think we need to look at more about the industry distribution, and also how to classify, whether that Pebble classification is the best one for us to look at African firms. So I think it's very important, and also about causality. Causality, we're looking at it through two ways. One is interview. The firms, tell us they have some new products which make them more competitive than they're able to enter the international market, which could be regional, African regional. They export to other African countries. And also in the econometric analysis, both the firm level and the cross-country level, we have addressed this indigeneity, used instrumental or variable approach, used the GMM, system momentum approach. So use different qualitative and quant methods to cross-check about this causality. And we found is firms becoming more competitive when they are able to do something, improve their packing, even improve their package, or they found in different cans, make them their products more marketable in international market. So we found these cases, and also through large firm level panel data found this causality. And about the value chain, like that Bruce has mentioned, it's very important. This international pressure make Chinese firms to cut the cost and improve quality. And in our research, actually, what we say regional value chain is not only regional to within Ghana, it's regional to Africa. So it's ECOWAS, the West Africa region, or the sub-African region. However, yes, the quality will be lower than the firms that they produce products to the global value chain, because they are serving the African market. They have to also address, on the one hand, is whether their capability can raise to that high end to serve the UK market. And on the other hand, is the market demand. What market can afford? and they are using those kind of frugal innovation type of thing, and cutting some of the functions or replacing the quality of the material, which is acceptable, as you said, acceptable products, but not the highest quality products. So we found this regional product value chains is kind of feasible way for African firms to move to global value chain, to make a big jump. Leapfrogging sometimes is a too big step forward for African firms. And then what Nick asked about this lack of interaction between higher education and the firms, and what happened in the university side. First is, I have to confess, we have not looked at the other side of this problem. I think next step really need to look at the supply side of the knowledge, what's happening and what kind of research and what kind of incentive. However, what I can say is one of our PhD students looking at what happened in Chile is lack of incentive. One of the key issue. When you appraise or monitoring or appraise the academics by number of publications or how many projects funding you get, they just publish things. Then if you take into account the number of patents, then apply for patent, and that's all. Unless your policy, your remuneration and appraisal promotion policy incentives include impact, knowledge transfer as one of their achievements, then they will do this. So these incentives is very important, and also the type of knowledge. And what she found out is other Chilean firms, either in the mining sector, is very capable. They can either sort out things themselves, or they need foreign university, they don't need domestic university. Or other firms, they do not, in general, don't have that kind of needs for university type of knowledge input. So I think for Africa, this is another area for next research, very important. And also about innovation, whether they are similar in less developed countries and developed countries. I think if I have not made the convey the message clearly, I really want to say the innovation system and also the type of innovation in Africa, in low-income countries, is different. It's different from the innovation system in the industrialized countries. Although I used the same framework, but the role and the weights are different, and the mechanism and the interaction are different. My final question, I think, George, you are going to answer Professor Lundua's question. We'll come back to you later.
Okay, good. Well,
George, answer
George.
Professor.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks very much. I think that I like to focus the question on the innovation that gets done in the formal research system and how it flows into the private sector. And I would like to say that, yes, there are initiatives. There are initiatives, in fact, as I speak, there is one that is going on and is meant to promote the transfer of innovations from the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research into the private sector. And it's not only the CSIR, but it's also selected universities, University of Ghana, polytechnics, Kumasi Polytechnic, another university in Accra, 5 of them. And it is meant to actively stimulate innovation and get the innovations transferred to the marketplace. And so this is being promoted. It is a ministry-sponsored initiative, and it is running for 2.5 years. It is not only that. We can talk about some other projects that are being implemented. For example, the West Africa Agricultural Productivity Program, that is going on in Ghana and some other West African countries. A component of it is meant to set up what we call the innovation platforms, and the innovation platforms are set up in some communities that is meant to facilitate the transfer of agricultural research to the farmers in those communities. So these initiatives are going on. The second part of your question has to do with whether in assessing these, there is a certain level of significant impact. And I would say that, yes, if you assess, you may have impact in terms of the achievement of the project objectives. But there is always the issue of sustainability, because projects end, then, of course, the funding that goes with enabling the researchers and the community members to continue to interact, to use innovation, freezes out. And so I think fundamentally we need to address the challenge of sustainability. And for me, I think in addressing the challenge of sustainability, we need to acculturate in the research system and at the user end of innovations, the fact that there has to be that continuous interaction and respect for innovation and the use of it. And when we do that, then we will continue to experience the expected impact.
All right, very good. Well, thank you very much for that, contribution as well. So after the sort of the high-level keynote that talked about sort of the high-level issues around innovation, and also from both the policy community and the research community, we now had some practical insights into innovation. I think that was just what we needed at this stage of the conference, so we can get stuck into these issues during lunchtime. I think the final thought that I have from this session is that if anybody thought that you can buy innovation just like that, then just look at this chart that Xiaolan put up, and that George was talking about as well, is that actually what is needed is not just simply finance. You can buy innovation, but it's all this interaction that takes place, and it's an open innovation system that is absolutely crucial to think about it at global levels, but also at local levels, at the innovation platforms. So let's think about that during lunch, and let's reconvene. I would say at around quarter past 2 for the next session. Thank you very much, Xiaolan, for the excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for your patience.